Hi, everybody. Welcome to Behind the Headlines. I'm David Horovitz, the editor of the Times of Israel. And our guest today is Efraim Halevy, former director of the Mossad. Welcome, Efraim. How are you?
I'm fine. Surviving these days, as everyone is.
Well, hopefully we're at the beginning of the end of this nightmare, or is that too optimistic?
As an intelligence officer, I will simply say, I don't want to forecast this one.
Okay, let's plunge straight into the to the real essence here. And I want to ask you a kind of a semi-personal question to open, because I think it's a good way into this. You had a very long career, largely in the Mossad, and eventually you were its director. I want to ask you, this is a very little country on the western edge of a potentially toxic landmass, and you're heading a security apparatus critical to the defense of this country. What does it feel in terms of the weight of responsibility that one feels as director of the Mossad? How did that feel for you?
Well, there are several layers of responsibility. First of all, there's the responsibility for handling the day-to-day affairs of an organization which has a four-digit number of employees, without going into more detail. Secondly, there are ongoing operations at every moment of the day and night. And that is a responsibility which has to be carried. Thirdly, there is responsibility towards the senior level, the political master, who has to be informed on certain matters and who has to be consulted from time to time if necessary. Fifth, you have the international dimension, the relations with neighbors, the relations with, shall we say, colleagues in the business of intelligence around the world, and as in recent years, more and more relationships that are with the political levels of more and more countries around the world. And finally, there is the public aspect, which has become very prominent these days. The way the Mossad is viewed and is assessed in the public eye. Whether I like it or not, that is a fact of life for whoever is now in the business. And in my days, also there were moments when I had to take this into account. I think that these more or less shall we say, the manifold aspects of being head of the Mossad at any period, at any point in time.
So you had actually left the service and you were called back after the failed attempt to kill Khaled Mashal on the streets of Amman. For you personally, I assume you didn't expect that you would become the director, and then you became the director at a particularly fraught moment as well.
Yes, indeed. Well, prior to that, several months previously, I'd been called in on an emergency basis to try and resolve the crisis. And this was a crisis that had to be resolved within a very short period of time. I was then Israeli ambassador to the European Union. I was hastily recalled on a Thursday evening. I arrived Friday lunchtime and immediately plunged into this affair. And I had a very, very tight time schedule here to meet, because at the moment I had arrived, the sovereign king of Jordan had refused any contact with anybody within Israel as a result of this event. And there was a feeling that this might end in either a suspension of a peace treaty, in which I had been involved very much years previously, not too many years previously, as the personal envoy of Rabin. I also had a serious personal problem here, because I was very close to Rabin, and the murder of Rabin was an event in the lives of all of the people of the state of Israel, but certainly more so in the lives of those who were close to him. And I was close to him, very close to him at that time. And therefore, whether I should become involved in this, in trying to resolve the problem for somebody who had succeeded him in circumstances which, again, were a matter of deep feelings inside the Israeli public was a problem for me. All these elements were in my mind as I was flying in, and I didn't know what to expect. And ultimately, I dealt with the matter, and strange as it might seem, at no time throughout this event, until I had made the breakthrough, did I ever have a meeting face-to-face with the Prime Minister to hear what he had to say about it and what exactly he wanted me to do. So on the one hand, I had a free field to do whatever I thought fit, up to a point, but a very, very distant point. On the other hand, I realized that I was on my own. And if I had resolved the problem, as I did in the end, I would be doing it as a service to the state of Israel. If I had failed, it would have been my personal failure and not the failure of the government that was at the time, or the Prime Minister, who I never met, except fleetingly later on, after I had been to Amman and after I'd made the breakthrough.
I just want to understand that, because I hadn't heard that little element before. So you were appointed, or you were called in to resolve the crisis without a meeting with Netanyahu? Correct.
What happened was that I was received at the airport and whisked off to the headquarters of the Mossad, where there was a meeting being held with Mossad leadership and several others, including the chief of staff and other figures. And the question was, how do we resolve the problem? And I heard all kinds of ideas that were thrown onto the table, like how to placate the sovereign king of Jordan, how to soften his heart, so to speak, all kinds of goodies in the defense and security field. My view was that this was not the kind of approach that should be adopted. And as I said, the problem was, in my view, not the problem of the Israeli Prime Minister, but the problem was the problem of the King of Jordan, because this event had been an event which took place on his sovereign territory in the heart of his capital. It was an act of attempted murder against a Jordanian citizen, which failed. And the question was how the king would resolve this, not only in receiving this or that or the other, but also in the eyes of his own public, which is something which nobody was thinking of at all. And when I came up with the idea that we should offer him something that he could not refuse, which was the release of the founding leader of the Hamas, Sheikh Yassin, everybody in the room said that this was impossible. And after a little while, talk subsided and nobody had anything to add. So they said, well, we have to consult the Prime Minister. So I said, well, consult the Prime Minister. They said, no, you consult the Prime Minister. So they got him on telephone and I was speaking to him. He had a very deep voice and he was obviously, in my view, had a fever. I was told later he had had an attack of influenza, but my guess is that it was a political influenza, a special type of influenza, which attacks leaders when they have to make difficult decisions. And when I told him what I told him, he said to me, that's impossible. He waxed immediately into English, which he does when he gets excited, or he did at the time, and said, think of something else, and he put down the receiver. And the following day, I was in Jerusalem at that time. There were very few mobile telephones. I didn't have one, but I was there in the apartment of my late parents, and my son was there as a student at the Hebrew University. And there was a telephone there. I had left the number, and the telephone phoned and rang, and I was told that the Prime Minister was on the line. He asked me how I was feeling, and I said I was feeling quite well. And then he said, you remember, you mentioned the name yesterday. I said, Mr. Prime Minister, I don't remember the name. He said, what are you fooling around with me? You know who you mentioned. I said, Mr. Prime Minister, I don't remember it. And I think I had good reason to put it that way. So he mentioned the name of Yassin, and he said, do it. And he put down the phone. Do what? Do how? And from that moment on, I knew I was on my own. I added one small caveat, that was that I asked that my name not be mentioned as the person involved in this, because I thought that the relation I had with the king was not a personal asset, but a national asset. And he said, I'll see what I can do. It became public very, very quickly. And you can reach your own conclusion. As I said, that was a moment in which I suddenly felt that I had the destiny of the peace treaty in my hands. To some extent, I cannot say how, to what extent, the future political survival of the prime minister in the circumstances, the relationship between the two countries and how this would develop and how it would be ultimately in the public eye on both sides of the Jordan. All kinds of thoughts that entered into my mind, and which I tried to put together in some kind of a logical order. But that was the way I approached this, and in the end, my proposal was accepted. There were a few additions to it afterwards, but that was the initial breakthrough. I think maybe that was one of the keys that ultimately led to my being recalled and appointed head of the Mossad.
Yeah.
I never asked the Prime Minister anything about that in the future. I never mentioned it. He never said anything to me about the way I had carried out my mission. I didn't write a report on my discussions with the king, and nobody asked me for a report. The sequence was the sequence that I had in my mind, and it's related to some extent in the book I have published called Man in the Shadows, published, how much is it, 14 years ago? Time flies. That was it.
Can I move you forward now to much more recently, long after you were no longer in the Mossad, but just to get your sense of the capabilities and the assessments that lead to operations. It strikes me that the Mossad operation, the publicly disclosed, very, very publicly disclosed Mossad operation to remove from Iran, from Tehran, I think 0.5 ton of material relating to Iran's nuclear program from safes in a warehouse in Tehran. That's a staggering operation. We don't know all the details, but we know a fair amount of the details. This to me suggests extraordinary capabilities and extraordinary confidence. Give us some sort of insight into the thinking that goes into planning, the assessment of risk, and then the decision to publicize.
Well, I'll deal with your questions in reverse. In my days, such operations were not publicized. And I will not detail the operations which have not been publicized. I will not say that they were comparable. I will not say that they were more or less of importance, although they were in some cases of very great importance. But what I will say is that in an operation like this, you have to devote a lot of time to discussing possible problems that arise throughout the operation. And you have to try and to work out, at least theoretically, a large number of options that you would have in dealing with a problem which came up during an operation and which caused the problem in rescuing whoever it was who carried out these operations. That is one thing I want to say. Secondly, I would like to say that some of the operations we carried out were not these kind of operations, but in some cases were no less hazardous. We were working on 5 continents. We were working not in only within the Middle East. We were operating elsewhere. And we carried out operations in on other continents, in backward countries, in countries where transportation was very minimal, in countries where the technical facilities, communications and the like, were close to non-existent. In these cases, in much that went on, one had at that time to rely on the professionalism and devotion of the team who was carrying out the operation, but first and foremost to rely on the commander of the operation in the field. In other words, once the operation begins to roll, in those days, I'm not saying now, I always used to say to the people who were about to leave, and especially to the commander, from this moment on, my head is in your rucksack. That is the way I felt it. And my head in this way traveled almost around the world many, many times.
Is the Mossad better than any other country's equivalent organization? Does it have to be? Would we not have been able to survive without this kind of extraordinary apparatus?
I think we should be careful not to be too proud and too vain in this field. There are other organizations. There is the CIA and the American intelligence establishment, which is very powerful and a very, very effective one. And if you talk about an operation like the Bin Laden operation, just to cite one, that was a very intricate operation. And I remind you that during this operation, the President of the United States himself was ensconced in the White House together with all the people involved at the top following the operation. There is the Russian outfit, which should not be belittled. And the Russian approach to intelligence is a very different one from the approach of the Western world or the non-Russian world. It is a long-term investment type of operational approach, which has a lot of merit. Just a few days ago, a figure died in this field at the age of 98, and this was George Blake, who was an intelligence officer and who served as an intelligence officer. But what is less known, although it is not secret, is that George Blake was to some extent a Jew. His father was born in Holland. His name was Behar, and he was of Turkish origin. And Blake never forgot his Jewish ancestry in one way or another. After his father died, he went on to Cairo to study in Cairo. And he grew up in Cairo, and he was very close to a French, an Egyptian Jew named Henri Curiel. The name, I think, doesn't mean much to you or to anybody else, but Henri Curiel was one of the leaders of the Egyptian Communist Party. And Blake himself has said that much of the feelings he had and much of his preparations he had was the influence of this man Curiel upon him over the years. Now, this is a man, and I will quote what President Putin said a few days ago. He said, "Colonel Blake was a brilliant professional of a special kind and courage. In the years of his difficult and intense service, he made truly invaluable contribution to ensuring the strategic parity and preserving peace on the planet." This is a very, very, very hefty sentence. In other words, the significance of Blake was not just the fact that as a result of the double operations which were carried out, which he revealed to the Soviets, much of what he did had a major strategic value. And when we speak about the Mossad and its strategic approaches, which I certainly admire and I applaud in the Middle East, with leaders in the Middle East and so forth, and I was involved in this in many ways. We shouldn't think that we are unique. We're not unique. Other countries have different methods, different approaches. In the Russian system, the intelligence service is a very, very important element. Heads of the intelligence services became leaders of Russia, not as president, but as Secretary General of the party. Man like Andropov, who was head of the KGB, who later became head of the Communist Party and so forth. And of course, President Putin, who was a KGB officer operating in East Germany. One has to, in assessing the impact of intelligence in the political and in the strategic world, we mustn't only concentrate on Israel. Israel is certainly unique in many aspects and has been extremely successful. Successive heads of Mossad have been involved in a lot of this kind of activity, and with very, very valuable dividends for the state of Israel. But we should be, from time to time, just a little more modest in speaking of our unique aspects and so forth. Yes, we are very good, extremely good, but we're not the only player on the playground.
And what do you see as the key challenge for Israel now? I think the threat of conventional warfare has receded. Terrorism is ever present. The effort to demonize Israel, I think, is potent. We have Iran-sponsored terrorist organizations of certain kinds on most borders, and we have the Iranian nuclear bid. You know, what would you consider to be the key threats and concerns that we face now in terms of ensuring our survival and ability to thrive?
Well, first of all, I'd like to make a fresh statement. I think that Israel is invincible. I don't think it is possible to destroy Israel. I think Israel today, with close to a 10 million population, which is larger than several countries in Europe, like Denmark, like Norway, we're close to Sweden. I don't want to make other comparisons. We're much bigger a population like Ireland. What I'm trying to say is we're not just a small little country. Maybe territorially we're small, but in terms of our capacity, of our scientific capacities, our strategic capacities and so forth, I don't think that it is possible to destroy Israel, first of all. Secondly, I'd like to say that the strategic scene has been changing all the time. And the breakthrough in bringing agreements with our neighbors has reached a point where we have to make strategic decisions of a different nature. I remind you that at the end of the War of Independence, we were isolated. And now we have a safe border in the south with the Egyptians, who were our prime enemy for many, many, many years. And we have a border with Jordan, which was the longest border of the state of Israel. And we have a set of relationships with countries within the region. Beyond that, relationships that began 40, 50 years ago, even 60 years ago, if we include Morocco. People are talking a lot about Morocco. We were in Morocco there 60 years ago, and we were very, very influential there in supporting the Moroccans in some of their most extreme problems that they had to deal with security-wise. So we have a lot of assets in the region in a very large sense of the word. I say region from North Africa up to the Gulf. We have three problems. We have a problem in the north. A problem in the north, which is a complex problem. And we do not have a peaceful border either with Lebanon or with Syria. We've tried many years to reach negotiations with the Syrians. Israeli prime ministers have negotiated with the Syrians. Rabin negotiated with the Syrians. Who also negotiated with the Syrians?
Oh, Barak, I suppose.
Barak, Olmert negotiated with the Syrians through the Turks. And Netanyahu negotiated with the Syrians several times. And but now it's a different ball game, because Syria is now, to some extent, also not only a partner of Iran, but also has a strategic link with Iran, the Iranian forces inside Syria. And one of the major Iranian objects is that they want to have a physical border with Israel. They want to sit on our borders, and they would like this to happen. And that is one of the strategic aims that they have. And we have Russia in Syria, and Russia is there to stay. And we have, in effect, three major countries in the Middle East today in terms of population. We have Egypt in the south with over 100 million population. We have Turkey in the north with 100 million population. And we have Iran with 100 million population. Now there's a talk that Erdogan now wants to renew a better, shall we say, relationship, reach a better relationship with Israel now. He wants to improve it and I think this should be of interest on that. But when it comes to Iran, that's a different story. And Iran is a country in which we had a very good relationship in the past. I used to travel to Iran regularly in my first years in the Mossad. And there is no real conflict, strategic conflict between Iran and Israel, territorial-wise or from other aspects. And therefore, I think that the biggest challenge we have today is not how to defeat Iran in the battlefield, because a confrontation with Iran in the battlefield does not mean to say that it would be a result of 10-0 in terms of a football game. It might be, shall we say, 9-1 or 8-2 or something like that. But the 2 that we would lose are much more significant than the 8 that we would gain. And I think that the number one major item on the agenda should be for Israel today, how to bring about a situation in which we can sit down and talk to the Iranians in a meaningful way. And I think it's not beyond possibility. And I'm saying that A, as a person who has been dealing with all kinds of negotiations over many years, and B, because I believe today that Iran as Iran is not thirsting for a military confrontation with Israel, however much the propaganda and language they are using are very threatening and very, very disquieting.
But that presumes that their ostensible religious motivation and hostility to us can be discounted or addressed somehow?
You know, in the Iraqi-Irani war in the 80s, in which both sides lost many, many, many lives, at one point in time, the United States moved in and gave the Iraqis a lot of support in intelligence, which helped them to turn the tides of war in their favor. And the leader of Iran at the time, Khomeini, got up one morning and he changed the policy, and he went for some kind of a arrangement with his enemy, and people around him said, but how can you say this? I mean, just yesterday or the day before you said the opposite. And the answer was, that's God's will. The Iranians have the, shall we say, the weight of being a super religious country. But they also have the capacity of having a leader who at any moment in time can say that he's going to make an about face, but this is God's will. I don't think that the Israeli Prime Minister, at least not up to now, is able to talk in the name of God. Although that might change, that I don't know, but one never knows. But the leader of Iran, the Ayatollah, the supreme leader, speaks in the name of God. And it has its limitations, but it also has its capacities. And therefore, I would say that as many other things in life, also in intelligence, it's always good to have a plan B. Not only a plan how to defeat your enemy, but also how to find some kind of accommodation with your enemy. And my view, which I'm sure is not the majority view of the powers that be in this country today, is that we should never neglect our investment in plan B.
Do you have anything specific about how we might change this interaction with Iran? A specific suggestion?
No, I don't want to go into details for certain reasons that I don't want to detail here. Not that I'm trying to make an allusion to some very deep secrets I'm carrying. I'm not. But I think that it wouldn't be useful to say that. What I will say is that over the many years that I've left, since I left office, which is about almost next year will be 20 years after leaving the Mossad, I was very much involved in participations in what you call track 2 meetings around the world and seeing all kinds of people. And I also met Iranians, not only Iranian exiles, but also Iranians from Tehran, in large groups of people and so forth. And I think it is possible to start talking on these terms. It's not easy. It won't be popular in Israel, I think, at the moment, for a variety of reasons. But I think that we should not neglect this, because in the end, however much the recent agreements we have, the Abrahamic Accords, as they're called, with the Emirates and with Bahrain, and possibly with Sudan. By the way, the Moroccans say they're not part of the Abrahamic Accords, and that is something which is also should be understood. I don't envisage a coalition in which we're going to have a joint military confrontation with Iran, with the air forces of the Emiratis and the others fighting on our side. I don't think this is something that they would enjoy. I don't think that they would think that this is a good idea for them. So this is not a, in my view, a strategic understanding which leads to a military and a strategic conclusion in terms of combat. And therefore, we should rejoice with the agreements we have, the normalization, as it's called, and it's not a peace treaty. And we have paid our prices for these normalizations. It's not peace for peace, as an important person in Israel said at the beginning, which we simply trade peace for peace. Since we didn't have war, we didn't have to get peace. But we paid a price, and the prices are becoming more and more known to the public eye. But I think that we should have an interest in trying to lower the temperature with the Iranians, not only to up the ante. And as I said, you never know when you go one step too far. And after that, the way back is sometimes very perilous.
Efraim, I could truly talk to you for many hours, and I think it would be fascinating. On the other hand, I don't want to take too much of your time, and I think that's a pretty interesting place to end, unless there's something that you particularly want to add.
No, I don't want to add anything more of substance, only to say that I was aware of what I was saying in the recent minutes and so forth, or I am sure that I won't find a large number of people swirling around my residence and applauding what I'm saying. I don't think this is going to happen. But I do think that even in times like these, when the drums are beating, even in times like these, when we are geared up for a possible Iranian action of one kind or another, as is being said, there's a famous saying in Latin, "Si vis pacem para bellum." If you want peace, prepare for war. It doesn't say, if you want peace, go to war. It says, prepare for war. I think we should prepare for war, and we should want peace.
Fair. I think there is an audience for that kind of considered mindset. I certainly hope so. And thank you, Efraim, and take care and be well.
You too.
Thank you.
And take your vaccination when it comes.
Yes,
All the best.
thank you.